The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as Ambassador Zixtal of the Hegemony strutted across the polished floor. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light from the chamber's twin suns, casting rainbow patterns across the assembled delegates. Today would mark the beginning of a new era, one where the upstart species called humans would finally learn their place in the cosmic order. "Honored delegates," Zixtal began, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had conquered 12 star systems before humans had even discovered fire. "We gather today to address the concerning expansion of the Terran Federation into what they laughably call uncharted space." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Korthani delegation's tentacles writhed in agreement, while the machine minds of the synthetic collective processed the implications with cold efficiency. Even the peaceful, ethereal ones, beings of pure energy who rarely involved themselves in material affairs, had manifested to observe this momentous occasion. Zixtal continued, "These humans have shown a disturbing disregard for established territorial boundaries. They've colonized 17 systems in the past 50 cycles, claiming manifest destiny and freedom of exploration. Such arrogance cannot be tolerated." The human delegation sat in uncomfortable silence at their designated section, a clear slight as their seating was positioned farthest from the speaker's podium. Ambassador Sarah Chen, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and steel-blue eyes, maintained her composure despite the mounting hostility in the chamber. Beside her, General Marcus Rodriguez shifted slightly in his seat, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "The Terran Federation," Zixtal pronounced the words like a curse, "has refused our generous offer to relocate their colonies to the Outer Rim territories. They claim their settlements are non-negotiable and their people will not be moved. Such stubbornness from a species barely 2 centuries into space travel is amusing." Laughter echoed through the chamber, the chittering of the insectoids, the harmonic resonance of the crystal singers, and the mechanical approximation of mirth from the synthetic collective. The sound grated against Ambassador Chen's nerves, but she kept her expression neutral. "Furthermore," Zixtal's voice rose dramatically, "these humans have had the audacity to establish defensive installations around their colonies. They speak of protecting their citizens as if we, the established powers of this galaxy, pose some sort of threat." More laughter, this time tinged with disbelief. The idea that any species would need protection from the Galactic Council seemed absurd to the assembled delegates. After all, they had maintained peace and order for over 3 millennia. "But the most egregious offense," Zixtal continued, his crystalline features darkening, "is their refusal to submit to standard civilization protocols. They've declined our offers of technological advancement, rejected our cultural exchange programs, and most insulting of all, they've refused to acknowledge the superiority of our established order." The chamber fell silent. This was indeed serious. No species in recorded history had ever refused the Council's guidance. To do so was not just unprecedented, it was unthinkable. Ambassador Chen finally stood, her movement drawing every eye in the chamber. "If I may address the Council," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Zixtal's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "The primitive speaks. Very well, human. Explain your species' inexplicable behavior before we render judgment." Chen stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back. "Honored delegates, my species appreciates the Council's interest in our affairs. However, we must respectfully decline your offers of relocation and subjugation." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The word subjugation hung in the air like an accusation. Several delegates began talking at once, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of outrage. "Silence!" Zixtal commanded. "Did this creature just suggest that the Council's benevolent guidance constitutes subjugation?" I did, Chen replied calmly. Because that's exactly what it is. You demand we abandon colonies we've spent decades building. You want us to relocate to systems you've designated as suitable for lesser species. You expect us to adopt your technologies, your customs, your entire way of life, and in return, you offer us the privilege of serving the established order. The Korthani delegation's speaker, a massive being whose bulk required anti-gravity support, boomed across the chamber. Ungrateful mammals. Do you have any idea what we're offering? Peace, prosperity. An end to the struggles of independent development. We never asked for your help, General Rodriguez interjected, earning sharp looks from his own delegation. And we certainly didn't ask for your supervision. Zixtal's exoskeleton began to glow with inner fire, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. Your arrogance is astounding. Do you truly believe your primitive species can survive without our protection? Do you have any concept of the dangers that lurk in this galaxy? We've been surviving just fine, Chen responded. Our colonies are thriving, our people are free, and our exploration continues. We've encountered hostile forces before and dealt with them appropriately. Hostile forces? The ethereal one's speaker manifested more solidly, its energy form crackling with disbelief. What could primitives possibly know of true galactic threats? Chen exchanged a look with Rodriguez, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. We've encountered the Void Hunters twice, destroyed a plague world, and successfully defended against a machine swarm incursion. We're aware of the galaxy's dangers. The chamber erupted. These were threats that had challenged even the Council's combined might. The suggestion that humans had faced them alone and survived seemed impossible. Lies! Zixtal shrieked. The Void Hunters alone nearly brought the Korthani Empire to its knees 3 centuries ago. No single species, especially not primitives like you, could possibly— The evidence is in our mission reports, Chen interrupted. Feel free to verify them. But the point remains. We don't need your protection, and we won't accept your dominion. The synthetic collective's primary unit spoke for the first time, its voice a perfect harmonic tone. Analysis indicates 73.6% probability of deception in human claims. However, their technological signatures suggest capabilities beyond initial assessments. Recommendation: further investigation before action. There will be no investigation. Zixtal's form was now blazing with fury. We have been patient enough with these upstarts. The time for diplomacy has passed. He turned to address the full assembly. I call for an immediate vote on Resolution 2847, the Terran Compliance Initiative. All in favor of bringing these humans into line with civilized galactic standards, by force, if necessary? Tentacles waved. Crystalline forms chimed their agreement, and energy beings pulsed in unison. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor. And opposed? Zixtal asked with obvious contempt. Only 3 delegates registered opposition, 2 minor species that rarely voted against human interests, and surprisingly, the ethereal collective's representative. The resolution passes, Zixtal announced with satisfaction. Humans, you have 72 standard hours to begin evacuation of your illegal colonies and report to designated relocation centers. Failure to comply will result in the implementation of enforcement protocols. Ambassador Chen stood slowly, her face grim. Ambassador Zixtal, distinguished delegates, I want you to understand something very clearly. We've tried diplomacy. We've attempted peaceful coexistence. We've even offered trade partnerships and mutual defense agreements. You've rejected all of it in favor of ultimatums and threats. She paused, looking around the chamber. So let me be absolutely clear. Humanity will not abandon its colonies. We will not relocate to your designated zones, and we will not submit to your authority. Then you choose war, Zixtal stated flatly. No, Chen replied, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to press against the very walls of the chamber. You chose war. We're simply going to finish it." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, General Rodriguez stood beside his ambassador. "You want to know what humans are capable of? You're about to find out. And when this is over, when your fleets are broken and your certainty is shattered, remember this moment. Remember that we tried to warn you." As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, Zixtal felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: uncertainty. There had been something in the human female's voice, something in the way the male carried himself, that suggested depths his species hadn't fathomed. But the die was cast. The Galactic Council had never failed to bring a rebellious species into line. Humans, despite their strange confidence, were just another primitive race that needed to learn respect for their betters. Within hours of the vote, the largest military force in galactic history began mobilizing. 7 major fleets representing the Council's most powerful members converged on the human territories. The Hegemony's crystal dreadnoughts, the Corthani battle moons, the synthetic collective's self-replicating armadas, over 10,000 vessels in total. It would be, every expert agreed, the shortest conquest in galactic history. On Earth, emergency sessions convened in every major government. The news of the Council's ultimatum spread quickly through human space, bringing with it a curious reaction that would have puzzled the alien delegates. Humanity didn't panic. They didn't plead for mercy or scramble to comply with the Council's demands. Instead, something else happened, something that would have chilled the crystalline blood in Zixtal's veins if he had understood its significance. Humanity got angry. In military academies across human space, instructors pulled out classified textbooks that hadn't been opened since the last interstellar conflict. In research facilities, scientists began final checks on weapons systems that existed only in the darkest rumors. In shipyards, vessels that appeared on no official registry began emerging from hidden construction bays. The Council had made a critical error in their assessment of human nature. They saw humanity's colonies, their exploration, their expansion, as signs of primitive aggression. They failed to understand that these were actually signs of human restraint, because for all their expansion, for all their settlements and defensive installations, humans had been holding back. The colonies were just the tip of the iceberg, the visible portion of a species that had learned, through centuries of warfare and survival, to always keep something in reserve. As the Council's fleets approached human space, confident in their overwhelming superiority, they were about to discover a truth that had eluded them in all their calculations. They weren't facing a primitive species trying to punch above its weight. They were facing the descendants of predators who had clawed their way to the top of one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy, who had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that would have broken lesser species. They were facing humans, and humans, when pushed to their limits and threatened with extinction, didn't surrender. They evolved. Admiral Kexathara stood on the command deck of her flagship, the Crystalline Sovereignty, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. The combined Council fleet stretched across space like a glittering constellation of death, 7,000 vessels representing the finest military might in the galaxy. The human territories lay before them, seemingly defenseless. "Status report," she commanded, her crystalline voice echoing through the bridge. "All fleet elements report ready," her tactical officer responded. "The Corthani battle moons have achieved optimal firing positions. The synthetic collective's swarm vessels are prepared for immediate deployment. Long-range sensors detect minimal human military presence." Kexthara's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Minimal? They have fewer than 300 vessels defending 17 star systems. Either these humans are incredibly foolish, or they're planning something desperate." "Intelligence suggests both," her communications officer interjected. "Intercepted transmissions indicate widespread civilian evacuations. They appear to be abandoning their outer colonies without a fight." "Wise, if belated," Kexthara mused. Perhaps they finally understand the futility of resistance. What the Admiral didn't know was that the evacuations her sensors detected were actually strategic repositioning. Human civilian vessels were indeed moving, but not to flee. They were converging on predetermined rally points where hidden military depots had been stockpiling supplies for decades. The humans had learned long ago that in space, the difference between a cargo hauler and a warship was often just a matter of what you loaded into the cargo bay. In the Proxima Centauri system, Captain James Harrison stood in the cramped command center of Mining Station Echo 7. To any external observer, it appeared to be exactly what it claimed, an asteroid mining operation. The reality was considerably different. "Tactical, what's our status?" Harrison asked. "Kinetic bombardment systems fully charged, sir," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park reported. "Mass drivers are loaded with tungsten penetrator rounds. Estimated enemy fleet arrival in 6 hours." "And our mining equipment?" Park's grin was predatory. "The asteroid reshaping charges are armed and ready. We've got enough firepower hidden in these rocks to level a moon." Harrison nodded. Echo 7 was just one of dozens of similar installations throughout human space. Facilities that appeared innocuous, but had been designed from the ground up with defensive warfare in mind. Humans had learned from their own bloody history that the best fortifications were the ones your enemy never saw coming. Meanwhile, aboard the Hegemony command vessel, Zixtal was reviewing intelligence reports with growing confusion. "This makes no sense," he muttered. "Our scouts report that human military installations are essentially empty. Where are their defenders?" "Perhaps they've accepted the inevitable," suggested his aide, though her tone carried doubt. "The deployment of such overwhelming force may have broken their will to resist." Zixtal's exoskeleton darkened. Something felt wrong about this scenario, but he couldn't identify what. In his experience, species typically responded to superior force in one of 3 ways: immediate surrender, desperate last stands, or futile attempts to flee. The humans seemed to be doing none of these things. "Open a channel to Admiral Kexathera," he ordered. "I want confirmation that all human military assets have been accounted for." The Admiral's response came within minutes. "Negative, Ambassador. We've identified and tracked less than 30% of their reported fleet strength. Intelligence suggests they're either hiding or have been deliberately misrepresenting their numbers." "Find them," Zixtal demanded. "I won't be made to look foolish by primitive deception." What neither Zixtal nor Kexathera understood was that human military doctrine had evolved far beyond their comprehension. Humans didn't think in terms of massive fleet engagements or glorious battles. They thought in terms of survival, adaptation, and maximum damage with minimal resources. In the Vega system, Commander Elena Vasquez floated in the pilot's seat of what appeared to be a standard cargo transport. The vessel's identification broadcast claimed it was carrying agricultural supplies to the outer colonies. The truth was that it carried something far more dangerous, a crew of humans who had volunteered for what they knew would likely be a one-way mission. "Contact in 30 minutes, her navigator announced. "Council scouts are conducting standard boarding inspections of all civilian traffic." "Good," Vasquez replied. "Remember, we're just frightened colonists fleeing the war zone. Keep the terror convincing until they're inside." The cargo her ship carried wasn't agricultural supplies. It was a prototype weapon system that existed nowhere in Council databases, a gravitational pulse generator that could tear the molecular bonds of crystalline structures apart. Humans had studied their enemies carefully, identifying weaknesses that the Council species had never considered because they'd never faced an adversary creative enough to exploit them. As the Council fleet moved deeper into human territory, they began to encounter what appeared to be panicked civilian traffic fleeing the conflict zones. Ship after ship was stopped, boarded, and cleared for passage. The Council forces, confident in their superiority, followed standard protocols designed for dealing with primitive species. They had no protocols for dealing with humans. The first indication that something was wrong came when Admiral Kexathera's sensors detected an energy spike from a civilian transport that had been cleared for passage hours earlier. The signature was unlike anything in Council databases. "What was that?" she demanded. "Unknown, Admiral," her sensor officer replied, confusion evident in his voice. "The energy reading came from the cargo vessel Harmless Passage, but it's already past our perimeter." "Scan it again." I can't, Admiral. It's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, it's not there anymore. No debris, no energy signature, nothing. It just disappeared." Before Kexathera could respond, alerts began cascading across her tactical display. Ships throughout the fleet were reporting similar incidents. Civilian vessels that had been boarded and cleared were suddenly vanishing from sensors, only to reappear moments later in impossible positions. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission. Origin unknown." "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was unmistakably human, calm and professional despite the circumstances. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. To whom am I speaking?" Kexathera's crystalline form blazed with indignation. "I am Admiral Kexathera of the Galactic Council Enforcement Fleet. You will identify your position and surrender immediately." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Admiral. You see, you've just entered a combat zone and your forces are now designated as hostile targets under Terran defense protocols." "Impossible!" Kexathera shrieked. "We detected no military vessels. Your entire fleet couldn't possibly—" "Admiral," her tactical officer interrupted, his voice tight with panic. "I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the fleet formation. They're everywhere." "That's correct," Admiral Chen's voice continued calmly. "What you perceived as fleeing civilians were actually our mobile defense platforms. What you thought were empty mining installations are our orbital fortresses, and what you assumed was a primitive fleet hiding in fear is actually positioned in perfect ambush formation around your forces." The tactical display lit up like a constellation as hundreds of previously invisible human vessels suddenly appeared on sensors. They surrounded the Council fleet in a complex three-dimensional formation that spoke of careful planning and intimate knowledge of enemy capabilities. "You have one opportunity," Chen continued. "Withdraw from human territory immediately or face the consequences of your aggression." Kexathera's fury overcame her growing unease. "You dare threaten us? We have 7,000 vessels." "You can't possibly have more than a few hundred." "Numbers aren't everything, Admiral. But since you mention them, our current deployment consists of approximately 1,200 active combat vessels, supported by 1,500 defensive platforms and 800 mobile assault units. We also have 47 asteroid-based weapons systems and 6 deep space kinetic bombardment arrays positioned throughout this engagement zone." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sounds of Council crew members checking and rechecking their sensor readings. The numbers were impossible. Humans simply didn't have that many military assets. "You're bluffing," Kexathera declared, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "Perhaps you'd like to test that hypothesis," Chen replied. "But first, let me explain something about human military philosophy. We don't fight fair. We don't honor traditional combat protocols. And we certainly don't give our enemies the courtesy of a formal declaration before we annihilate them." "Your threats are meaningless," Zixtal's voice cut across the communication channel. "This is Ambassador Zixtal of the Hegemony. I demand you cease this charade and comply with Council directives immediately." Chen's response carried a note of genuine amusement. "Ah, Ambassador, the architect of our current situation? Tell me, in all your strategic planning, did you ever research human history? What relevance could the past of primitives possibly have?" "A great deal, actually. You see, humans have a rather unique evolutionary background." We're descended from persistence hunters, predators who specialized in running our prey to exhaustion before moving in for the kill. We've applied that same principle to warfare for millennia. What are you talking about? Zixtal demanded. We've been preparing for this moment for over a century, Ambassador. Every colony we established, every mining operation we built, every trade route we developed, all of it was designed with one primary purpose: to create the most defensible space-based civilization possible. The truth was dawning on Kex Thera with crystalline clarity. The colonies, they're not just settlements. Correct. They're fortress systems. The mining operations aren't just extracting minerals. They're manufacturing weapons and building defensive installations. The trade routes aren't just for commerce. They're supply lines for a military network you never saw coming. Zixtal's exoskeleton flickered as he processed the implications. This is impossible. No species plans that far ahead. No civilization could maintain such deception for so long. You underestimate human patience, Ambassador, and human memory. We remember every slight, every threat, every attempt to subjugate us. We've been preparing for this war since the day we first encountered the Council's generous offers of protection. You're still outnumbered, Kexathara insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Are we? Chen asked. Computer, tactical display update? Suddenly, the sensor readings changed again. What had appeared to be asteroids throughout the system began registering as artificial constructs. Merchant vessels that had passed through the area for months were revealed as mobile weapons platforms. Even the space stations that had welcomed Council diplomats for years showed hidden military configurations. "Dear gods," whispered a Korthani officer aboard one of the battle moons, "they've turned their entire civilization into a weapon." "Now you begin to understand," Chen continued. "You wanted to know what humans are capable of, Ambassador. You're looking at it. We've spent decades building a military infrastructure that's invisible until activated. Every human civilian you've ever met, every traitor you've dealt with, every diplomat who's smiled and spoken of peace, all of them were part of this preparation." Kex Thera stared at her tactical display in growing horror. The human force disposition showed a level of strategic thinking that surpassed anything in Council databases. They hadn't just prepared for war, they'd prepared for this specific war, against these specific enemies, using intelligence gathered over decades of apparent cooperation. "This is your final warning," Chen announced. "Withdraw from human territory immediately." "And if we refuse?" Zixtal challenged, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Chen's response came with a coldness that seemed to drop the temperature on every bridge throughout the Council fleet. "Then we'll teach you why the universe evolved predators." The silence stretched across the void for exactly 37 seconds. Admiral Chen had counted. When Ambassador Zixtal finally responded, his crystalline voice carried none of its earlier arrogance. "Human Admiral, surely we can reach some accommodation. The Council is prepared to negotiate." "The time for negotiation was 72 hours ago in your chambers, Ambassador. You chose enforcement protocols instead." Chen's voice remained level, professional. "Admiral Kexathera, you have 60 seconds to begin your withdrawal. Failure to comply will result in the immediate implementation of defensive measures." Admiral Kexathera's sensors showed her the impossible truth. Human vessels had seemingly materialized from empty space, their positions forming a perfect three-dimensional cage around the Council fleet. But it was the composition of those vessels that truly shocked her. These weren't the crude, bulky warships she'd expected from a primitive species. They were sleek, elegant designs that moved with predatory grace through space. "Admiral Chen," Kexathera transmitted, "I am a military commander, not a politician. Perhaps we can discuss terms between professionals." Terms were offered repeatedly through diplomatic channels. Your government chose to reject them in favor of ultimatums. The professional discussion you're requesting should have happened before you brought 7,000 warships into sovereign human territory. Zixtal's image flickered onto the communication screen, his crystalline features dim with worry. This is madness. The Council has maintained galactic peace for 3 millennia. You cannot simply ignore established authority. Ambassador, Chen replied with devastating calm, your established authority has never encountered a species like humanity. You've governed compliant civilizations who accepted your superiority without question. We are not compliant. The truth was more complex than Chen let on. Humans had studied every aspect of Council military doctrine for decades, analyzing their tactics, their technology, their strategic assumptions. What they'd discovered was that the Council had grown complacent, relying on overwhelming force and technological superiority to crush resistance before it could begin. But humans had never fought wars based on technological superiority. They'd learned to win through adaptation, innovation, and ruthless exploitation of enemy weaknesses. 30 seconds, Chen announced. Aboard mining station Echo 7, Captain Harrison watched his tactical display with professional interest. The Council fleet was attempting to reorganize into a defensive formation, but their movements were predictably conventional. They were following doctrine written for fighting other Council species, enemies who fought with honor, who announced their intentions, who followed established rules of engagement. Target acquisition confirmed, Lieutenant Commander Park reported. We have firing solutions on the Hegemony command vessel and 17 escort ships. Weapons free, Harrison authorized. Let's show them what human mining equipment can really do. The attack began with no warning, no declaration, no ceremonial challenge. One moment the Council fleet was repositioning. The next moment, tungsten projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed began tearing through their formations. The kinetic rounds, accelerated by mass drivers designed for moving asteroids, struck with the force of nuclear weapons. Admiral Kexthara watched in horror as 3 of her escort vessels simply ceased to exist, vaporized by impacts that her sensors barely detected. "Return fire," she commanded. "Target those platforms." "Admiral," her tactical officer responded with confusion evident in his voice. "We can't locate the source of the attack. The projectiles seem to be coming from the asteroids themselves." "That's impossible. Asteroids don't have weapons." "These ones do," Chen's voice cut through their communications with dark amusement. "Did you think we established mining operations just to extract minerals? Every asteroid in this system has been hollowed out, reinforced, and equipped with military-grade mass drivers. You're not fighting ships. Admiral, you're fighting the geography itself." The second wave of attacks came from directions the Council forces had never considered. The civilian vessels that had passed their inspections suddenly revealed hidden weapon systems, emerging from cloaked positions throughout the fleet formation. But these weren't conventional energy weapons or missile systems that Council defenses were designed to counter. Commander Vasquez activated her gravitational pulse generator at point-blank range from a crystalline dreadnought. The weapon sent waves of distorted space-time through the enemy vessel's hull, causing the precise molecular arrangements that gave Hegemony crystal tech its strength to collapse into inert powder. The dreadnought didn't explode, it simply fell apart, its elegant crystalline structure reverting to component elements in seconds. "Impossible," whispered a Hegemony tactical specialist aboard another vessel. "That crystal took millennia to grow. Nothing should be able to unmake it so quickly." "You've been thinking about this all wrong," Chen explained, her voice now broadcast across all Council frequencies. "You see yourselves as superior because you're older, more advanced, more experienced. You think age equals wisdom and power." Another human vessel decloaked directly beneath a Corthani battle moon, its specialized weapons systems targeting the massive structure's gravitic generators. When those generators failed, the battle moon's own mass became its enemy, crushing internal systems under gravitational forces its designers had never anticipated. But humans learned something different from our evolution. Chen continued as the Council fleet tried desperately to establish firing solutions on enemies who seemed to anticipate their every move. We learned that the young hunt the old. We learned that adaptability beats experience. We learned that innovation trumps tradition. The synthetic collective's swarm vessels attempted to overwhelm human positions through sheer numbers, deploying thousands of autonomous fighters in coordinated attack patterns. They discovered that human point defense systems had been specifically designed to counter swarm tactics, not through matching numbers, but through area effect weapons that turned the swarm's own density against it. Electromagnetic pulse mines detonated throughout the swarm formations, each explosion cascading through the tightly coordinated network protocols the synthetic fighters used to communicate. Within minutes, thousands of advanced combat drones were reduced to inert metal, their coordination protocols burned out by weapons that attacked their greatest strength. "Your technology is impressive," Chen acknowledged, as the Council fleet's casualty reports mounted. "But you've made a critical error in assuming that advanced technology equals superior technology. Human weapons aren't more sophisticated than yours, they're more specialized. Every system you see has been designed to exploit specific weaknesses we identified in your equipment." Ambassador Zixtal's voice cracked as he transmitted, "How? How could you possibly have known our weaknesses? Our technology is classified at the highest levels." "Ambassador, we've been trading with Council species for decades. We've hosted your diplomats, entertained your scientists, welcomed your cultural exchanges. Every friendly gesture, every diplomatic reception, every collaborative research project was an intelligence-gathering operation." The truth was staggering in its implications. For nearly a century, human civilization had presented itself as eager pupils, grateful for Council guidance and protection. In reality, they'd been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history, learning everything possible about their potential enemies while revealing almost nothing about their own capabilities. "The crystalline resonance frequencies of hegemony vessels," Chen continued as another dreadnought collapsed under gravitational assault. "The gravitational harmonics of Corthani battle moons, the network protocols of synthetic swarms, the energy matrices of ethereal constructs. We know them all." Admiral Kexathera realized with crystalline clarity that her fleet wasn't just losing. It was being systematically dissected by an enemy that understood her forces better than she did. "All vessels, emergency jump protocols, we're withdrawing." "Negative," Chen replied. "Your fleet's faster-than-light drives have been disabled." "What?" Kexathera checked her engineering reports in disbelief. "That's impossible. Our FTL systems are completely isolated." "From external interference, yes, but not from the maintenance protocols you've been using. Those helpful efficiency upgrades human technicians installed during your diplomatic visits to our worlds. They contained subtle modifications that could disable your jump drives on command." The Admiral stared at her tactical display as the truth became clear. The humans hadn't just prepared for war, they'd sabotaged the enemy fleet before the battle even began. Every Council vessel that had visited human space over the past decade had been quietly compromised. "You see, Admiral," Chen explained as human forces continued their methodical destruction of Council vessels, "we study our history very carefully. We know what happens to civilizations that accept the protection of more powerful neighbors. We know how generosity becomes dependence, and dependence becomes subjugation." Zixtal's transmission was barely coherent. "This is impossible. No primitive species could plan so comprehensively. No civilization could maintain such deception for so long." "You keep using that word, primitive. I don't think it means what you think it means." Chen's voice carried a note of genuine amusement. "You see technological advancement as the measure of a civilization's worth. We see survival as the only metric that matters. By now, nearly a third of the Council fleet had been destroyed or disabled. The remaining vessels were trapped in a killing field of their own making, surrounded by enemies they couldn't see coming using tactics they couldn't counter. "I'm prepared to offer terms," Admiral Kexithera transmitted, her voice carrying the weight of defeat. "The terms are simple," Chen replied. "Complete withdrawal from human space, immediate cessation of all hostile activities, and formal recognition of human sovereignty over our current territories." "The Council will never," Zixtal began. "The Council will accept these terms," Chen interrupted, "or the Council will cease to exist. We've identified the locations of your home worlds, your military installations, your industrial centers. This fleet was your first move. What you're experiencing now is our response to your first move." "You're threatening genocide," Zixtal shrieked. "I'm explaining consequences," Chen corrected. "You declared war on humanity, Ambassador. We're simply better at it than you expected." The communication went silent for several minutes. When Zixtal's voice returned, it carried a quality of broken resignation that sent chills through every Council crew member. "Terms. Accepted." "Excellent," Chen replied. "Admiral Kexithara, your ship's FTL systems will be restored once you've cleared human space. You have 6 hours to collect your survivors and begin your withdrawal." As the Council fleet began its humiliating retreat, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the tactical display with professional satisfaction. Around her, human officers monitored the withdrawal with quiet efficiency. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving transmissions from civilian authorities throughout Council space. It appears word of the engagement is spreading quickly." "And their responses?" "Mixed, ma'am. Several species are expressing interest in negotiating direct diplomatic relations with humanity. Others are demanding the Council explain how a primitive species managed to defeat their combined fleet." Chen nodded. This had always been the plan's ultimate goal, not just to defeat the Council's military force, but to shatter their reputation for invincibility. The galaxy was about to discover that the established order wasn't as stable as it appeared. "Admiral," her tactical officer added, "long-range sensors are detecting movement from previously unknown installations throughout Council space. It appears we weren't the only species preparing for this possibility." "The galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place," Chen observed. "Helm, set course for Earth. It's time to let humanity know that the age of hiding is over." As the human fleet began its own withdrawal, something profound had changed in the galaxy's balance of power. For 3 millennia, the Council had maintained order through the threat of overwhelming force. That threat had just been revealed as an illusion. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had faced the combined might of the established powers and not just survived, but won decisively. More importantly, they had done so while revealing that the Council's superiority had always been built on assumptions rather than reality. In the days that followed, the galaxy would learn that humans were not just another species seeking their place in the cosmic order. They were predators who had spent decades learning the weaknesses of their prey, preparing for the moment when patience would give way to action. The Council had asked what humans were capable of. Now they knew. The universe's most lethal species had just announced its presence, and nothing would ever be the same.